And please do make sure your cell phones are off. Oh, it's counting down.
Well, we welcome Chava Weissler for her contribution to the class on parables. Chava, take it away.
All right, I will take it away. Let me preface this by saying that, as I think we've mentioned, and as some of you know, Pat and I taught a version of this class a few years ago in which we had 6 sessions, and therefore I still have way too much material in today's class. I will not get through it all. I also discovered, to my dismay, that when you import an old slide into a new presentation, for some reason, at least on my computer with my program of PowerPoint, you cannot edit it. So slides I would have taken a lot out of still have all that other stuff in them, and I may just not talk about it very much. But let me say, since I'd like us to get the, should we take the lights down? Yeah. I'd like us to get an idea of what it is I'm trying to do and not get lost in the details. There are a lot of details in this presentation, and is just to say I'm going to give background on the parables of the rabbinic sages. The parables of the rabbinic sages are in lots of ways quite different from the parables of Jesus, although there are some parallels. And actually, I had to cut out the parallel to the parable of the talents because just too much material. But what I'm going to talk about, first of all, is to give you some background on how Jewish Bible interpretation works, and how parables play a part in that, rabbinic parables. And then I want to talk, and that parables become understood as a key to understanding Torah. So I don't say this anyplace explicitly in the presentation, but I want to say that the concept of Torah is more expansive in Judaism than just the 5 books of Moses. In some ways, it can refer to the whole Hebrew Bible. In some ways, it can refer even to the study of all the literature concerning the Bible, all the thinking, and so that if you think of when I talk about parables as a key to understanding Torah, it doesn't mean only the 5 books of Moses. It means the scriptural tradition more broadly understood. And I hope I will be able to get to parables that grapple with national tragedy. These were very important, and they were important in the wake of the destruction of the temple by the Romans in the year 70, the dispersion of the Jewish people, and which was understood as a terrible tragedy. And as I say later, the first temple was destroyed in 586 BCE. The people were exiled to Babylonia, and 70 years later they were able to return. There has been no official return since the Romans destroyed the temple in the year 70. It's a permanent exile. Although there may be some people who would like to count 1948 as something that overcame that. That's not my view, but in any case, it's so that it's a condition where the expected redemption and renewal of life, of Jewish life in the Holy Land did not occur. And this was something that had to be grappled with theologically. How could God do this to us? And especially because other people were saying, including especially Christians, look, you see how things are? That's because you rejected the Redeemer when he came. So some of the parables, which I hope I get to, don't deal explicitly with Christianity, but the parable of the how could God do this to us is the parable of the enraged and then grieving father. And then how could we be abandoned like this when everybody's saying, yes, you're abandoned, forget about what you used to do, is the parables of the deserted spouse. So, but the stuff is complicated, and the rules of, so anyway, I'll get into it. But, okay, just the quick review. I'm not even going to get into the Greek part of this, but the word mashal in Hebrew, which can be translated parable, it has a broader meaning. It can mean parable, it can mean proverb, it can mean fable, it can mean, for example, and as the definition is, suggests a set of parallels between an imagined fictional event with human characters and an immediate real situation confronting the parable's author and audience. And in some cases, the audience must interpret, in any case, the audience must actively interpret the parable to find its meaning, although in rabbinic parables there's often a meaning given, but it's not necessarily complete. This book, Parables and Midrash, by my friend David Stern, who used to teach at Penn, now teaches at Harvard, is really the foundation for the material I use in this course. I learned a tremendous amount from him. Just to say briefly, the parables of the rabbinic sages are slightly later than those in the Synoptic Gospels. And the other thing, besides that summary of the times, oops, wait, how did I do that? That was amazing. Here. The other thing to say is that, again, I think I may have mentioned this before, in the New Testament, and also in the parable that Nathan presents to King David, the parables are in the context of conversation. In the rabbinic writings, the parables usually occur in the course of biblical interpretation. The technical word for that is exegesis, and they function to delve into the meaning of the biblical text, and that's what we're going to be doing today in different ways. So just to say something about Jewish biblical interpretation. First of all, biblical interpretation was among the most pervasive activities pursued by Jews, including early Christians. Jews regarded the Hebrew Bible as a sacred, authoritative text without inconsistency, superfluity, or contradiction. Please silence your phones, everybody. And the Bible could reveal the will of God through close and intense study of its words and verses. Now, this may sound like fundamentalism, but it's actually the opposite. The meaning was believed not to be immediately obvious, but cryptic and difficult to discern. Many leveled, multiple meanings for the same verse. While there might be an obvious plain sense, the deeper meaning was there to be discovered beneath the surface of the words. Most important, and this is very hard often, I find, for people who are not accustomed to this to accept, the meanings discovered were not expected to be uniform. And contradictory interpretations were regarded as both these and those. It cites contradictory interpretations and says these and those are the words of the living God. One biblical verse has many meanings, and you can go on for chapters about a single verse in this literature. I mean, it's sort of like a parallel is, you know, is there a single meaning to a Shakespearean sonnet? There's not a single meaning to those kinds of texts, and there's no single meaning for the biblical text either. Nonetheless, there's a kind of family resemblance because there's a fund of basic theological beliefs. What is midrash? I'm going to try to do this again very briefly. The word midrash is derived from the Hebrew root darash, which means to inquire, investigate, or search out. And the activity of interpreting is part of the meaning of the word in the rabbinic period. And by extension, the midrash also refers to specific interpretations and thus to the collections of rabbinic literature in which those originally orally transmitted interpretations were recorded. So I guess what you need to know here is that rabbinic midrash collections, and there are collections of midrash on most of the books of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, and also other kinds of collections. So the rabbinic midrash collections are running commentaries on biblical verses, biblical books, verse by verse. Okay, a little lightheartedness. King David and King Solomon led merry, merry lives with many, many lady friends and many, many wives. But when old age crept over them with many, many qualms, King Solomon wrote the Proverbs and King David wrote the Psalms. So, who knows who wrote this? I found it on the internet. But I guess what's important for us is that Jewish tradition regards King Solomon as the author of 3 biblical books: Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, and Proverbs. And remember that the word for Proverbs is mashal, which is the same as the word for parables, and that's important for understanding the next passage. And all 3 works. So what we're going to do is go through a set of parables which talk about parable itself as the key to understanding Torah. And it is from Shir HaShirim Rabbah, which is called the Great Song of Songs. It means the Midrashic collection on the meaning of the Song of Songs. But they're going to quote, okay, there are 4 biblical texts that are brought into this interpretation. First of all, Song of Songs, 1:1, the Song of Songs by Solomon. This whole passage is an interpretation of that, which you might think is pretty straightforward, right? But the Song of Songs by Solomon, but it actually goes much deeper than you might think. It also brings in Proverbs 1:1, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. And as I said, the word mashal means both proverb and parable. And it also brings in Ecclesiastes 1:1, the words of Kohelet, son of David, king in Jerusalem, and Jewish tradition regards Kohelet as another name for Solomon. And it also quotes the verse later in Ecclesiastes near the conclusion of the book, because Kohelet was a sage, he continued to instruct the people. He listened to and tested the soundness of many maxims. Or one can, the Hebrew word for maxims is mishalim, the plural of mashal. Also, and this is important, it'll be important in the interpretation, the word for listened is izain, and it has the same root and is actually written exactly the same in the Hebrew script as the word for ear, which is ozen. So listened and ear, same, and we're going to find another meaning of ear as we go through the parables. Okay, so how does this passage that we're about to read understand the Song of Songs? How does Solomon, it's going to say that by inventing parables, Solomon made the Torah comprehensible in a way that it hadn't been before. They're going to say that because he wrote Proverbs, the same word as parables in Hebrew, he was the inventor of the parable. Okay, what does this single verse, the Song of Songs, mean? Its meaning is what this verse says. Here we're quoting from Ecclesiastes. Because Kohelet was a sage, he continued to instruct the people. He trained his ears, is another word for listening, and tested the soundness of many maxims. This means he listened to the words of Torah. He tested the words of Torah. He made handles, literally ears, because handles often are shaped like ears. He made handles for the words of Torah. And thus you find that before Solomon, this is their poetic interpretation, the parable did not exist. Now he's going to go through a number of quite beautiful, they are going to go through a number of quite beautiful examples. And through all of this, the question is, what is Torah like? And what does a mashal, a parable, do? Okay, Rabbi Nachman recited 2 parables. It is like, and that's the form. It's first, it's like, and then likewise gives the explanation. Rabbi Nachman recited 2 parables. It is like a great palace that had many entrances. Everyone who entered lost his way from the entrance. A certain clever man came. He took a spool of thread and hung it at the way to the entrance. Thereafter, everyone came and went by means of the spool of thread. Likewise, before Solomon lived and invented the parable, no one was able to comprehend the words of Torah fully. But after Solomon, everyone began to understand Torah, or to understand more the depths of Torah. And the same Rabbi Nachman gave a second version. It's like a thicket of reeds which no one was able to penetrate. A certain clever man came along. He took a scythe and cleared it. Afterward, everyone began to enter and leave through the path he had cleared. Likewise, Solomon. Okay, now, does this strike you as strange? It's not only complicated, but in this, we're going to do a few more of these short parables. But what is Torah like in these parables? This was just yeah.
Well, it sounds like Torah was incomprehensible or too dense.
Dense, like a thicket. What else? I mean,
Well,
yeah.
doesn't the spool of thread trick derive from Greek legend?
Well, what we will
Daedalus and the
find is
labyrinth?
that a great many, it's Ariadne's thread, but a great many of these motifs are ancient folkloric motifs. In fact, if we get to the deserted spouse parables, it's the same, it's very similar to Penelope awaiting Odysseus. And I also found, I was listening, I'm a folklorist, I listen to folk music, I was listening to a ballad about, and I thought, it's the same plot. I mean, he's been away for 7 years, people keep telling her, marry somebody else, you know, and she waits for him. So it's a very ancient and well-continuing plot. But how can the Torah be like a palace or like a thicket? Any ideas? Well, we'll go on and see a few more. What is Torah like and what does a mashal do? Rabbi Yosef said, it's like a huge basket of fruit which did not have a handle, not an ozen, an ear, so no one was able to move it. A certain clever man came along. He made handles for the basket and began to move it by its handles. Likewise, before Solomon lived, no one could understand the words of Torah, but after Solomon, everyone began to comprehend Torah. This isn't a sentence about the history, the literal history of Torah interpretation. Rabbi Shelah said, it's like a large pot full of boiling water, but it did not have a handle with which to move it. A certain man came along, he made a handle for it and began to use the handle to move it. What is Torah like and what does a parable do? Rabbi Hanina said, it's like a well, a deep well full of water whose waters were cold and sweet and delicious, but no one was able to drink from it. Then a certain man came along and supplied the well with one cord tied to another, one rope tied to another, and drew water out of the well and drank from it. Then everyone began to draw water and drink it. Likewise, from one matter to the next, from mashal to mashal, Solomon arrived at the secret of Torah, as it is written, the Proverbs or Mishalim of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, for learning wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of discernment. This means, by means of his Mishalim, Solomon came to understand the words of Torah. So what's Torah like? A palace, a thicket of reeds, a huge basket of fruit, a huge cauldron of boiling water, a deep well of sweet water. Okay, folks, make some sense of this. How can Torah be like those things? What does it mean to say that Torah is like those things? Well, here.
Partly it has many aspects.
Yes.
There's a lot to it.
Yeah,
It's not just one thing.
that's right. Somebody else? Well, here, well, okay, there's,
Something that's very desirable or delicious. That's
well, that's some of it.
thing.
Some of it is definitely desirable or delicious. Some of it seems a little dangerous, like the boiling water.
Some of it is a beautiful construction,
That's right.
and some of it is nurturing and nutritious.
Yep. Okay.
Bigger than we are?
Well, certainly bigger than we are. That's right. You can get lost in it. Yes, she is.
It seems to me that it's also saying that it's worth the effort to have to figure out how to understand it. And that all these parables are saying that someone usually comes first and makes the first effort, and then that makes it easier for the others.
Art is long and life is short. Yes.
Does this not beg the whole issue of historicity? We're lost in poetry and illusion, but what about the historic context of Torah?
It's irrelevant to the rabbis who are writing Midrash.
It's like you could pick anything in creation and compare it.
Well, certainly many, many things. Anybody else?
Yes.
I think they also want to do it anyway. Speak to the complexity of it, and that there's a need for someone to kind of have a bit of a key that makes it accessible to more people.
And what's the nature of the key? What's the nature of the key?
Could it be like a simile or a being able to catch the comparison that's there?
Yeah, although when you think about the actual ones in the example, what are all of them?
They're common and accessible.
Yeah, Jim, yeah.
Well, they're commonly experienced issues. They're almost like childlike in in that list. You have of 5 elements of the parables, and so there's a relationship that's implied by each of those 5 elements. How are you going to relate to that? I think that's what I'm struck by the list of the subjects of them.
Okay, here, Pat, pass that to Pat.
I'm thinking of this in parallel with Jesus saying the kingdom of heaven or is like this and this, this and this.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you never really reach the end.
Mm-hmm.
It's always like something more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole point of the parable is trying to define something that can't really be defined.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ava?
Wait, there's a...
This is a bit more basic question. I understand the parables try to explain things that you read in the Torah and make it understandable. So my question is, why is it important to understand what's written in the Torah?
Well, good question. And the brief answer is that the Jewish tradition is that God gave the Torah, whether just the 5 books of Moses or some larger revelation, to the Jewish people on Mount Sinai as their basic, as a covenant between God and the people of Israel, as their heritage, that which told them how to live. And therefore, for them, it's very important to understand it and understand it in all its depth.
It also speaks to the importance of wise people in the tradition, particular people who stand out, kind of sages. And then the other question, which you may be getting to, is if God wrote all of this, and I presume that's the assumption, right, that it's all divinely inspired, why would God scramble it up and create such riddles?
Well, I don't think that was a problem for the sages. I think that was their assumption about the complexity of God, and the fact that we have very little power. I mean, we are quite puny in our understanding.
Exactly, or approximately, when does the Torah date from?
Okay, so there are 2 kinds of answers. One is the traditional answer, and another is the historical answer. The traditional answer, there are some Jewish texts which say that the Torah predated creation. You know, in the beginning was the Word, and that God looked into the Torah to learn how to create the world. So I'm giving you the myths here. But a more typical answer is that the Torah was given on Mount Sinai to the Jewish people, and that was probably, I mean, if there even was a Sinai event, as they say, I don't know, 4,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, something like that. And the later writings of the Hebrew Bible came, I mean, most of them are by people who, you know, there are prophets who lived, say, in the 8th century BCE or whatever. They wrote their books in the 6th, you know, or so those various books are attributed to those people. I mean, and the traditional attribution of the Song of Songs to King Solomon and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, probably the historical King Solomon may not have written any of those books, but that's the belief.
Chava?
Yeah.
I wanted to say about the inscrutability of it. I think if it was so clear, we wouldn't struggle with the text. We wouldn't strive to learn, to understand, to go deeper. And as we go through life, we could see things differently. I think there's a richness in how complex it is.
Yeah. There's actually, there was an early scholar who said, turn it over, meaning the Torah, turn it over and turn it over because everything is in it. And later there developed actually a whole set of 4 levels of interpretation. This is a medieval thing, but that there's the simple literal level, there's the midrashic level, which is where we are now. Then there later developed philosophical, allegorical interpretations, and then mystical interpretations. So there's just the assumption that it is pluriform and full of multiple meanings. Anyway, so, and yes, there need to be wise elders who can lead us through the thicket, the palace, can even make perhaps the huge cauldron of boiling water, which is so interesting as a metaphor for Torah.
Well, how
Yeah.
can you coordinate the composition of the 5 books of Moses with the teachings of Socrates and Aristotle and the other and the pre-Socratic philosophers?
I mean, so look, it seems that the text of the Torah was probably edited, this is really not my field, around in the 5th century BCE. Yeah.
And well, that's about the time
Yeah,
Socrates.
yes, that's right. That's right. Anyway, just to say, a huge cauldron of boiling water with no handles is a pretty scary thing. So it's also scary, as well as sweet and rich and refreshing water and all those other things. Okay, and here are the picture. The lower picture has a couple of men studying it from nowadays, studying what they would call studying Torah, which includes many, many, many texts that came after Torah. Yes?
I'm curious, in the Jewish tradition, aren't many men actually making their lives work, or is that something I've picked up from novels?
Making their lives work studying Torah?
Studying the Torah and the wives' work.
Yeah, that was actually in Eastern Europe, it was the social ideal. Not many families could afford it, but the ideal was, in that particular place and time, that a man would spend his days devoting himself to Torah study, and his wife would have a business or whatever and support the family. Not the case in all Jewish communities at all times. Okay, let's go on. So a parable is like a thread, a scythe, handles, a rope, and a bucket that is common tools. It's also like a penny candle, and here's a nice parallel. The rabbi said, "Do not look upon the mashal, the parable, as a trivial thing, for by means of the mashal a man is able to understand Torah. It is like a king who lost a gold coin or a valuable jewel in his house. Does he not go looking for it with a penny candle?" Does this remind you of Luke, which I have over there? Or what woman, if she has 10 silver coins and loses 1 coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? So this was obviously going currency in the and likewise, do not look upon the mashal as a trivial thing, because it is by means of the mashal a man is able to comprehend the words of Torah. And know that this is so, for Solomon comprehended the finest points of Torah by means of the mashal. Those tools we were talking about, those metaphorical tools. Buckets, scythes. And we can think more. I mean, I'm not going to discuss it further at this point. What does it mean to have those common objects thought of as tools for understanding Torah? All right. Now we're getting into the second part of this. This is the interior of the Arch of Titus, I think, in Rome. These are the Roman soldiers carrying off their booty from the Second Temple. The Second Temple was destroyed in 70 of the Common Era, that is, after the time of Jesus. And Judaism had to be completely reimagined. Before that time, Judaism had, it's not as abrupt a transition as it sounds here, but let me just do it quickly. Sacrifices, the sacrificial worship provided for in the book of Leviticus, ended because one was only permitted to sacrifice in the temple in Jerusalem. Therefore, the priesthood and the Levites who performed the sacred rituals became less important socially. There was a shift to study of Torah as the center of Jewish devotion. There was the development, although it had begun before, of the synagogue liturgy, of the prayers said in the synagogue, and the services are set to correspond with the times of the sacrifices, actually. The morning and the afternoon prayers are supposed to be to symbolize the morning and afternoon sacrifices. The rise of the rabbinical sages who shaped the future of Judaism, descendants of the Pharisees, the Tanaim and Amoraim. The eventual shift from Palestine to Babylonia as the center of Jewish scholarship. That is, people, there had always been Jews who had stayed in Babylonia, but as life under the Romans after 70 became increasingly difficult, there were fewer and fewer Jews living in Palestine at that time, and they were exiled, or they exiled themselves to a variety of places. So, as I've said, rabbinic parables are preserved in the context of biblical interpretation, and to make it explicit, the mashal consists of two parts, the mashal and the nimshal. The mashal is the story, and the nimshal is the explanation. So the story is, you know, that there's a castle that you can't find your way in, and somebody makes a thread, and the nimshal is that this is like Torah, and the parable enables us to understand it better. Usually the mashal is preceded by a biblical verse, which is the subject of interpretation, and the formula, it is like, there's a verse given, Song of Songs 1:1, Song of Solomon, it is like a thicket of reeds. The nimshal, and then concludes, the nimshal is also preceded by the formula similarly. This is the structure. It says, there's a verse, it is like, comes the parable, then comes similarly, which is the interpretation. And they have another biblical verse. Okay, now I want to talk in the remaining time about the king mashal, ways of imagining God. And in the overwhelming majority of rabbinic parables, not the one we've looked at, the protagonist is a king. Earlier parables may simply describe him as a man. Actually, this is one of these slides I couldn't edit things out of. And so the important thing, I'm not going to go to the rest of this slide, but the important thing is the protagonist is a king, and the king is God. Okay, two post-destruction motifs. The parables of the enraged and bereaved father, and the parables of the absent spouse. The first temple was destroyed in 586 BCE and was followed by the Babylonian exile. As I've said, 70 years later, Israelites were encouraged to return to Judea, where they rebuilt the temple. Also, in some of these passages, they refer to the exile of the northern kingdom, which was before that. The second temple was rebuilt in the times of Ezra and Nehemiah, and rebuilt in a far grander, far grander style by Herod. In any case, it was destroyed in 70 CE by the Romans, who renamed Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina, did not permit Jews to reside there. This second exile did not end. The rabbinic sages use the texts that talk about the first destruction to talk about their present experience of destruction. That's one of the keys to this. They use the biblical texts found in Jeremiah and other prophets that write about the destruction of the first temple, and also the book of Lamentations, which Jewish tradition attributes to Jeremiah, although he probably did not actually write it. But it's a book of lamentations about the destruction of the first temple. A very beautiful and poetic and heart-rending book. Okay, so here is Lamentations Rabbah. That means the Midrash on Lamentations. And he gives the quote. I don't know if you can read it. Let's see. The quote is Psalm 79:1, a psalm of Asaph. God, the pagans have invaded your heritage. They have defiled your holy temple. They have laid Jerusalem in ruins. It says a psalm of Asaph. It says a song of Asaph. Different translations. So here's the mashal. We'll get to the nimshal in a minute. It's written, a song of Asaph. O God, heathens have entered your domain. This is another same verse, different translation. A song? Why does it say a song? If heathens have entered your domain and laid waste to your holy temple and all that, it should have said a weeping, a dirge. Why should it say a song? Is the question the rabbis ask. Rabbi Eliezer said, it's a parable, like a king who made a bridal chamber for his son. He cemented, plastered, and decorated it. One time, they were making, all these things are full of making bridal chambers. I don't know what these bridal chambers were like, but they're always talking about them. At one time, his son angered him, and the king, in his rage, destroyed the bridal chamber. I made this for my son's wedding. Well, the heck with him. He's a jerk. The pedagogue, that is the son's tutor, who appears a lot in rabbinic literature, sat down and began to sing. People said to him, the king has destroyed his son's bridal chamber and you sit and sing? He said to them, for this reason I sing, for I said, better that he poured out his anger upon his son's bridal chamber and not upon his son. So here's the nimshal. Similarly, people said to Asaph, the Holy One, blessed be he, has destroyed his temple, and you sit and sing. He said to them, for this reason I sing, for I said, better that the Holy One, blessed be he, poured out his anger upon wood and stones and dirt, and not upon Israel. That's what is written, and this is from the book of Lamentations, and he has kindled a fire in Zion which has devoured the foundations thereof. That is just the foundations, not the people. And it gets somewhat more extreme and asks the question, does God suffer with us in our present distress? You know, God punishes. Does God feel bad about it, as a parent who punishes often does? You know, I got to give my kid a wallop, but I'm really sorry he's wailing. You know, Rabbi Yochanan, so here it is from Jeremiah. Thus said the Lord of hosts, listen, summon the dirge singers, let them come. Why is God calling for dirge singers? Rabbi Yochanan said, it is like a king who had two sons. He became angry at the first one, took a stick, thrashed him, and banished him. The king said, woe to this one, from what comfort has he been banished? He became angry at his second son. This is about the the northern kingdom of Israel originally and the southern kingdom of Judah. He became angry at his second son, took a stick, thrashed him, and banished him. The king said, "The fault is mine." In this case, he says, "The education I gave him was bad." Similarly, the 10 tribes, the northern kingdom, were exiled in 722 BCE, and the Holy One, blessed be he, began to proclaim to the following verse, "Woe to them for straying from me." And once Judah and Benjamin were also exiled, the Holy One, blessed be he, said, as it were, "Woe unto me for my hurt." That is, God's in pain, even though God is the author of the punishment, as is understood in the biblical text or by the rabbis. So David Stern says about this, I mean, there are many more examples, and they're, even more extreme. Here he thrashed his sons. I mean, there's ones in which his sons die. And anyway, this passage observes God as he passes from being the catastrophe's author, its maker and inflictor, to become instead its stunned victim, at once mourner and dirge singer. This change of character from victimizer to victim epitomizes the core ambiguity in the rabbi's conception of God, the sense of him as being simultaneously his nation's judge and the sharer of its sufferings. By having God lament the destruction, the rabbis were able to represent his response to their own laments, and to discover an empathetic God in the text of Lamentations, not simply one who would respond to Israel's misfortune, but a God who actually participated in the misfortune. The misfortune had to happen. The theology demands that the people of Israel strayed, and they had to be punished, but God also weeps with them in their punishment. Okay, parables of the king and his consort. I actually am going to get through all this stuff. I hope it's not. So these parables address the theological dilemma: why has God forsaken us? And when will God return and take us back in love? And also, again, what questions are not asked or are hidden in the narrative? And I'm going to go through one long parable with you. But think about this. Why has God forsaken us? I mean, one can also, I'm sure that the early Christians faced, in some ways, a similar dilemma with the fact that the second coming didn't occur right away. Where is Jesus? We thought he was coming back, So in some ways, it's a parallel. All right, this is one long story. And as I said, I actually was listening to a record of folk songs, English ballads, and actually, it's not a ballad, it's a different... Anyway, the folklorist in me requires me to proclaim it wasn't actually a ballad, it's more like a broadside, but anyway. In any case, but it was a very similar story, although it had a happy ending. Okay. Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana said, "It's like a king who married a woman and wrote her a large marriage settlement, ketubah. Jewish couples to this day who get married have marriage contracts. Mine is on the wall of mine with Nancy's on the wall of our apartment. But in the old days, they were, I mean, now they're symbolic, but then they were really, they made provisions for what the wife was going to get in the way of maintenance and all that kind of thing. It's called a ketubah. He wrote her, "So many bridal chambers, whatever they are, I am building for you. So much jewelry I make for you. So much gold and silver I give you." So as a king, he could afford to do this stuff. And he married her, and he wrote her this settlement, which was full of generosity. Then he left her for many years and journeyed to the provinces. Her neighbors used to taunt her and say to her, "Hasn't your husband abandoned you? Go, marry another man." She would weep and sigh. And afterwards, she would enter her bridal chamber and read her marriage settlement and sigh with relief. That is, he didn't come back, but just reading the document and all this stuff that he promised her, said, okay, he promised me this. He signed this document. He's coming back. Many years and days later, the king returned. He said to her, I'm amazed that you've waited for me all these years. She replied, my master, O king, if not for the large wedding settlement you wrote me, my neighbors long ago would have led me astray. So think about this. So who are the people here, and what's the wedding settlement? As I've already said, the king is God. Who's the wife? Israel, that's right. And what's the wedding settlement document? Well, more or less.
We have a question.
Here.
I think it's God's love and care for the Israelis.
Israelites. Israelis are the modern
sorry.
citizen of Israel.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
No, it's a document, but we'll go on and see what the nimshal is. Likewise, the nations of the world taunt Israel. So this is the nimshal. It's long. Your God does not want you. He has left you. He has removed his presence from you. I mean, this is right there in early Christianity. Come with us, and we will appoint you to be generals, governors, and officers. You join our clan. And the people of Israel enter their synagogues and houses of study, and there they read in the Torah. I will look with favor upon you and make you fertile. I will establish my abode in your midst, and I will not spurn you. And they console themselves. So, what's the wedding document? It's the Torah. It's the Torah. Yeah, that is that Torah which expresses the which is the sign of the covenant. Well, which is the document of the covenant. In the future, when the redemption comes, it hadn't come when they were writing this, whenever it was in the late antiquity, and it hasn't come yet. The Holy One, blessed be He, will say to Israel, my children, I am amazed at how you've waited for me all these years. And they will say to him, Master of the universe, were it not for the Torah you gave us, in which we read when we enter our synagogues and houses of study, I will look with favor upon you, and I will not spurn you. The nations of the world long ago would have led us away from you. That is what's written. Were not your teaching my delight, I would have perished in my affliction. That's from the Psalms. And there it says, this I call to mind, therefore I have hope. So, so we have a plot here. What questions are not voiced in this story? Well, when is one question. That's right. Yeah.
Why?
That's the most important one. Why would God do this to us? Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
These seem to me love stories.
Mm-hmm.
It's embedded in many of these parables.
Mm-hmm.
All the complications and difficulties of love.
Mm-hmm.
It's not all fine. It's wonderful, and it can be terrible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's right, and also both in the earlier parable about the king and his sons, or son, and the king and his spouse, whether it's parental love or whether it's spousal love, it doesn't run easy. That's right. That's part of it. That's why it's a good metaphor. Anybody else? Is there an implicit answer to the question of why in any of these?
Well, is the message kind of if you wait long enough, you will get the answer, so hang in there?
Well, maybe, but we're all still waiting.
Yeah. Well, the promise is still there, too.
Yeah, you're right. You're
Called
right.
hope.
Jim.
I'm struck that heaven or divinity is in the search, not the destination.
Say more about that.
Well, the exploration of Torah is what it's all about.
Right.
And you don't need more.
That's right. Because turn it over and turn it over because everything is in it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, Pat.
Jim may already have answered this, but I'm thinking, what do you do in the meantime until it comes?
What do you do?
How do we get through this waiting period?
Well, what are the rabbis have an answer for themselves and one which worked for the Jewish people for a long time, which is Torah study. That is trying to get to know what God is trying to tell us in all the many levels of this this multifarious text, multifaceted, multifarious text, which is, according to Jewish tradition, the word of God to us, to Jews and to humanity. And, trying to understand what it says to us, what it obligates us to do also, although that's not what's taken up in here, is the way you get through. Anyone else? Nancy, let's get.
All right.
So over time, the rabbinic tradition does become the province of certain scholarly folks. How does that relate to other members of the community, and does the interpretation, how does it make sense for the people who aren't part of the scholarly reading?
Well, that's a long, complicated question. What I will say is that although at the time the rabbis were doing this, the writing, talking in this way, there were other varieties of Judaism that eventually, rabbinic Judaism became, for most Jews, the de facto kind of Judaism. That is, you do have, of course, the early Christians who became Christianity, although they were originally Jewish. And you also have, a few centuries later, you have the Karaites who reject rabbinic interpretation. But it's true that for most of Jewish history, the rabbinic scholars were in the minority. They were tremendously respected and considered, again, by most people. There were various other kinds of things that happened as the authorities, and rabbinic Judaism shaped not only a tradition of scholarship but a way of life. So that when it came to resting on the Sabbath, or caring for the poor, or respecting one's parents, or what you could eat, all of this was shaped, rooted in the biblical text, but greatly expanded in later rabbinic Judaism, which became, over a course of centuries, the default way that Jews lived in most places and times. And so, on the one hand, there was not just the learned tradition, but the culture, which prized Torah study for boys and men. But also women participated in this stuff. I mean, in complicated ways, and there, you know, as in any folk culture, there was creativity, and you know, and then there was this big mystical movement in the High Middle Ages. There was a messianic movement in the 17th century. There was all kinds of stuff that changed it. But I have studied the texts written by and for women in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, and by and large, women accepted the basic framework of rabbinic Judaism and used it in their own ways to inform their lives. It's like, well, all I can say is I think what I want to teach this summer is a course on three different Jewish cultures, their histories, and their cuisines. And the reason I'm doing cuisines is partly to make sure I get the women in. So come back in the summer.
Eileen had a yes.
Yeah. It's kind of after the fact, but in my humble understanding, each one of us is important because we have to merit the return of the king and the queen.
Yeah.
And by following not the strictures, but the guidelines of Torah for living justly, we are helping the return. So each one of us is important.
That's right. That's right. I mean, and of course, the default explanation of Judaism as to is because of our many sins, the Messiah has not yet come. And if we could live better, the Messiah would come. So people have taken it upon themselves to try to live differently. I mean, you know, one branch of Hasidism now says if every Jew in the world observed the Sabbath perfectly for 2 Sabbaths, the Messiah would come. I mean, you know, anyway. So, you know, I mean, it is our human condition to live in an unredeemed world. And that really is what this is about. We have to live in an unredeemed world. We will live in an unredeemed world. There's Maimonides, the great Jewish medieval philosopher, had 13 principles, and the last was, I believe, even though he tarry, I believe that the Messiah will come. I believe with perfect faith that the Messiah will come. I have to say, well, I believe with perfect faith that the Messiah will never come, so. Anyway, folks, that's it.
On that note, let's give it up for Chava Weissler.